The morning mist hung low over the rolling plains of Wyoming territory as Zara Bishop slipped from her small cabin in the pre-dawn light, a weathered leather satchel clutched in her trembling hand. For 2 years, she had called this remote outpost home, but after yesterday's news, staying even one more day would crush what remained of her spirit. As she pulled her shawl tighter against the April chill of 1873, the soft crunch of boots on gravel stopped her cold. "Leaving without saying goodbye, Miss Bishop?" The deep voice belonged to Samuel Blackwood, his tall frame silhouetted against the purpling sky. He sat atop his chestnut mare, another horse her favorite Palomino saddled and ready beside him, Zara's heart hammered against her ribs. "This isn't your concern, Mr. Blackwood." The formality felt strange on her tongue after months of easy friendship with the ranch foreman. Samuel dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling softly as his boots hit the ground. At 30, he carried himself with the quiet confidence of a man who had seen his share of hardship but refused to be broken by it. "When the schoolteacher tries to disappear before first light, it becomes my concern." "I left a letter for the town council," Zara said, chin raised defiantly despite the tears threatening to spill. At 22, she had come west with dreams of independence and purpose. Now those dreams lay shattered at her feet. A letter. Samuel's voice was flat as he took a step toward her, his face coming into view, strong jawline, eyes the color of a summer storm, and a small scar above his right eyebrow from a childhood accident he'd once told her about over coffee after Sunday service. "That's all we're worth to you, a letter." "What would you have me do?" Her voice cracked. "Stay and watch everything I've built crumble. The school will close by month's end. The town council made that clear yesterday. So you run." He wasn't accusing, merely questioning as he moved closer. "I'm being practical." Zara adjusted her grip on the satchel. "Fort Laramie needs teachers. They've offered me a position. I'll have a real schoolhouse there, not a converted barn with a leaky roof." Samuel nodded slowly, his gaze never leaving her face. "I know about Fort Laramie. 60 miles of open territory between here and there. Apache raids, outlaws, not to mention the weather this time of year. I've made arrangements with the stagecoach that passes through Miller's Crossing. Miller's Crossing is 15 miles from here," he countered. "And that stage won't come through for another 3 days." Zara swallowed hard. She'd planned to stay at the trading post until then, though she hadn't fully thought through the dangers of traveling alone even that distance. "Which is why I'm riding with you," Samuel said simply, gesturing to the Palomino. "I don't need your protection, Mr. Blackwood. Never said you did." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "But you might need a friend." Zara hesitated, studying the man before her. Samuel Blackwood had arrived in Riversbend 2 years ago, just weeks after she'd taken the teaching position. As ranch foreman for the largest cattle operation in the area, he commanded respect, but it was his fairness and quiet strength that had earned him admiration. They'd developed an easy friendship, though lately she'd caught herself watching him longer than propriety allowed, wondering about the stories behind his rare but transformative smile. "Why would you do this?" she asked. "Maybe I've got business in Fort Laramie myself." "You're lying." "Maybe so." He shrugged those broad shoulders. "Or maybe I can't stand the thought of you facing that journey alone." Something unspoken passed between them, something that had been building in the church socials, town meetings, and chance encounters along Riversbend's single dusty street. "The ranch can spare me for a week," he finished. "Calving season's over and my second knows what needs doing." The eastern horizon was beginning to blush pink. If she intended to leave unnoticed, her window was closing. Zara glanced back at the small cabin that had been her home, then to the waiting horses, and finally to Samuel's steady gaze. "I'll need to leave a new letter," she conceded, "explaining I won't be taking the stagecoach after all." Samuel's smile deepened, revealing the dimple in his left cheek that always caught her attention. "Already taken care of. Left a note with Doc Morgan last night. He'll tell the council you've got an escort to Fort Laramie." "Last night," realization dawned on her. "You knew I was leaving, Mrs. Hathaway at the general store mentioned you'd settled your account yesterday. Didn't take much figuring after that." He stepped forward, gently taking her satchel. "Is this all you're bringing?" "I shipped 2 trunks last week," she admitted. "I've been planning this for longer than you might think." "I figured as much." He secured her bag to the Palomino's saddle. "You've always been thorough, Miss Bishop." Zara watched him check the cinch on her saddle, his movements practiced and efficient. "You don't have to do this, Samuel." His hands stilled at the sound of his first name on her lips. When he turned to face her, something had shifted in his expression. "Yes, I do, Zara." The way he said her name, like it was something precious, sent warmth spreading through her chest despite the morning chill. "The road to Fort Laramie is long," he said, offering his hand to help her mount. "And I reckon we both have stories to tell along the way." As the sun crested the distant mountains, Zara placed her hand in his and felt the calluses of hard work against her palm. Perhaps leaving Riversbend wouldn't be the clean break she'd imagined. Perhaps it would be the beginning of something unexpected. She settled into the saddle, watching as Samuel mounted his mare with easy grace. "Which trail are we taking?" "Northern route," he replied, adjusting his hat against the rising sun. "It's longer but safer. We'll stop at Holloway's trading post tonight." As they rode away from the small cluster of buildings that made up Riversbend, Zara couldn't help looking back one last time at the schoolhouse, where she taught everything from reading and arithmetic to basic astronomy and history. For many of her students, it had been their first and possibly only education. "They'll find another teacher," Samuel said, reading her thoughts. "Will they? The town can barely afford to keep the school open." "Riversbend is changing," he acknowledged. "The railroad's coming through 10 miles south. Town might not survive it." They rode in companionable silence as the sun climbed higher, the spring landscape coming alive around them. Prairie flowers dotted the grasslands, and in the distance, a herd of pronghorn antelope grazed peacefully. "Why did you really come with me, Samuel?" Zara asked after they'd put several miles between themselves and town. He adjusted the reins in his gloved hands before answering. "When I came to Wyoming, I was running from something." This admission surprised her. Samuel had always seemed so rooted, so certain of his place. "What were you running from?" "A mistake, one that cost a good man his life." His voice had grown quiet. "I was a Texas Ranger for 3 years. My partner and I were tracking a gang that had robbed a bank in Austin. I made a bad call." "He paid for it." Zara hadn't expected such honesty. "Is that how you ended up in Riversbend?" "After drifting for a while, yes. Needed somewhere quiet to figure things out." He glanced at her, the morning sun highlighting the flecks of gold in his gray eyes. "Then I met this schoolteacher who wouldn't stop asking questions about everything from cattle breeding to the territorial legislature." Zara felt her cheeks warm. "I was new. I wanted to understand the place I'd come to live." "You brought life to that town, Zara. Made people think about more than just surviving. That's why I couldn't let you leave alone. Felt like I owed you that much." "You don't owe me anything?" "Maybe not, but when a person changes your way of seeing the world, you notice when they're about to disappear from it." His words settled over her, weighty and unexpected. Had she really made such an impression on this stoic cowboy? And why did the thought please her so much? They rode through rolling grasslands that gradually gave way to more rugged terrain. Samuel pointed out landmarks and signs of wildlife, revealing an intimate knowledge of the territory. When they stopped at midday to rest the horses near a small creek, Zara watched him move with that same easy confidence, whether checking the horses' hooves or preparing a simple meal of jerky, hard bread, and coffee. "You never told me why you're leaving," he said as they sat on sun-warmed rocks, the horses grazing nearby, "beyond the school closing." Zara traced patterns in the dirt with a stick. "I received a letter from my sister in Boston. Our father is ill heart troubles. She wants me to return east." "But you're heading to Fort Laramie instead." "Yes." She met his gaze. "I left Boston to escape my father's control. He had my entire life planned, whom I would marry, where I would live. Coming west was the first decision I ever made for myself." Samuel nodded slowly. "And you're not ready to give up that freedom?" "Is that selfish of me, to choose my independence over family obligation?" "I'm not one to judge anyone's choices," he said. "We all have our reasons for the paths we take." "What about you?" Zara asked. "Do you plan to stay in Riversbend forever?" Samuel took a sip of coffee, considering her question. "Used to think I was just passing through. Lately, I've been wondering if there might be reasons to put down roots." Something in his tone made her heart quicken, but before she could respond, he was on his feet, scanning the horizon with a suddenly alert posture. "What is it?" she asked, standing as well, dust cloud to the west. Could be nothing or something, she finished, already moving toward the horses. Samuel's hand on her arm stopped her. Stay here, I'll get a better look. He retrieved a battered spyglass from his saddlebag and climbed a nearby rock formation. Zara watched him, admiring the sure way he moved across the uneven terrain. When he returned, his expression was grave. Riders, 6, maybe 7, moving fast. Outlaws, can't tell from this distance, but they're not taking a leisure ride. He began quickly packing their meager supplies. We need to move. They mounted quickly, Samuel leading them east toward a line of trees that followed what Zara assumed was a seasonal streambed. His easy demeanor had vanished, replaced by vigilant tension that reminded her of his ranger past. Is there somewhere we can hide? She asked, keeping her voice steady despite her racing pulse. There's a ravine ahead that will provide some cover. If they're just passing through, we'll let them go by. He glanced at her, his expression softening momentarily. Don't worry, I won't let anything happen to you. It wasn't until they'd reached the ravine and dismounted that Zara realized how completely she trusted this man whom she'd known for 2 years, but never truly known at all. As they led the horses down into the natural depression, hidden from the main trail by scrub and boulders, she wondered what other layers of Samuel Blackwood remained to be discovered. They waited in tense silence, Samuel positioned where he could observe the ridgeline without being seen. Zara stood beside her palomino, one hand resting on its warm flank, drawing comfort from the animal's steady presence. After what seemed an eternity, Samuel returned to her side. They've passed, heading north. Who were they? Not sure. They weren't wearing any gang colors I recognized, but they were well armed. He helped her remount. We should continue, but we'll take a more southerly route than I'd planned. It will add time to our journey. As they rode through the afternoon, Zara noticed Samuel was more vigilant, frequently scanning their surroundings. The easy conversation of the morning had given way to necessary communication and long stretches of silence. When they finally stopped for the night, they were still several miles from Holloway's trading post. Samuel found a defensible position near a small spring, sheltered by rock formations that would block their campfire from distant view. We'll reach Holloway's by mid-morning tomorrow, he said as he efficiently built a small fire. It's safer than pushing on in the dark. Zara nodded, unsaddling her horse as Samuel had taught her years ago during a town picnic. The memory brought a smile to her lips, how patient he'd been with the city-bred schoolteacher who'd barely known a bridle from a saddle blanket. What's that smile for? He asked, catching her expression as he returned from gathering more firewood. Just remembering the first time you showed me how to care for a horse. The 4th of July celebration 3 summers ago, his face softened with the memory. You were wearing a blue dress, had your hair up with some kind of silver pins. Zara's hands stilled on the saddle. You remember what I was wearing, a faint flush colored his tan cheeks. I noticed things, habit from my ranger days. She wasn't entirely convinced but let it pass, hiding her pleased smile as she continued tending to her horse. As night fell, they shared a simple meal of beans, jerky, and coffee. The prairie night was alive with sounds: the distant howl of coyotes, the rustle of night creatures in the brush, the soft nickering of the horses. Will you tell me about Boston? Samuel asked as they sat by the fire, the flames casting warm light across his features. I've never been further east than St. Louis. So Zara told him about growing up in a stately brownstone on Beacon Hill, about music lessons and French tutors, about the suffocating expectations of Boston society. She described the moment she'd seen the advertisement for teachers needed in Wyoming territory, how it had felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning woman. My father was furious, she said, wrapping her shawl tighter against the night's chill. Said I was throwing away my future for some wild adventure that would end with me dead or worse. And your mother, she died when I was 15. Consumption. Zara stared into the flames. She was the one who taught me to question, to dream of more than the life that had been prescribed for me. Samuel added another small branch to the fire. Sounds like you take after her, I hope so. Zara looked up at the vast canopy of stars overhead. In Boston, you can hardly see the stars. Too many gaslights, too much smoke. The first night I spent in Wyoming, I just stood outside staring up until my neck ached. I'd never seen anything so beautiful. When she lowered her gaze, she found Samuel watching her with an expression that made her heart flutter strangely. "What about you?" she asked quickly. "Where did you grow up?" "Hill country of Texas. My father ran cattle on land that wasn't much good for anything else. Learned to ride before I could walk properly, according to my mother." His voice held warmth when speaking of his family. "They're still there, write to them when I can." "Do they know about what happened when you were a ranger?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment. "Yes, my father said every man carries weight. The measure of him is whether he keeps walking anyway." Wise words. He's a wise man. Samuel set his coffee cup aside. "You should get some sleep." "I'll take first watch." Zara wanted to protest that he needed rest too, but the firm set of his jaw told her it would be futile. Instead, she arranged her bedroll near the fire and settled in, watching as Samuel moved to sit on a nearby boulder, rifle across his knees, his silhouette a reassuring presence against the star-filled sky. Despite the hard ground and unfamiliar sounds, Zara fell asleep faster than she expected. Lulled by the sense of security Samuel's presence provided, she woke some time later to his gentle hand on her shoulder. "My turn to rest," he said softly. "Any movement or sound that seems unusual, wake me immediately." Zara nodded, accepting the rifle he handed her. Though she'd never fired one, she'd made a point of learning the basics after arriving in Wyoming. A woman alone in the territory needed to understand how to protect herself. As Samuel settled onto his bedroll, Zara took up position where she could see in all directions. The night was peaceful, with only the occasional hoot of an owl or distant cry of a coyote to break the silence. She found herself watching Samuel as he slept, the firelight playing across his features. In repose, the lines of tension around his eyes softened, making him look younger, more vulnerable. What would it be like, she wondered, to trace those lines with her fingertips, to feel the texture of the beard he kept neatly trimmed? The unexpected intimacy of her thoughts startled her, and she quickly redirected her attention to their surroundings. She was leaving Wyoming territory, possibly forever. Developing feelings for a cowboy with roots in the very place she was abandoning would be foolish. Yet as the night deepened around them, Zara couldn't help but wonder if her decision to leave had been made too hastily. There was something about being here, under this vast sky with this man who seemed to understand her in ways no one else ever had, that made her question everything she thought she wanted. Morning came with a soft pink glow spreading across the eastern horizon. Zara had let Samuel sleep longer than the agreed-upon time, finding comfort in the peaceful night watch. She built up the fire and set coffee to boil, moving quietly to avoid waking him. But Samuel's instincts were too finely honed for such consideration. At her first movement toward the fire, his eyes had opened, instantly alert. Now he sat across from her, shaving with a straight razor using water warmed by the fire, his movements precise and practiced. "Did you sleep at all?" he asked, catching her stifling a yawn. "Enough." She handed him a cup of coffee. "It was a quiet night. You should have woken me for my watch. You needed the rest. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I enjoyed the stars." His eyes met hers over the rim of his cup, something unreadable in their depths. "We should reach Holloway's by mid-morning. You can rest there while I check if there's news of those riders." They broke camp efficiently, the routine already established between them despite having been on the trail less than a day. As they rode through the gradually warming morning, Zara found herself wondering what it would be like to do this every day, to wake with the dawn, to travel beside Samuel through this wild, beautiful country. Such thoughts were dangerous, she reminded herself. Fort Laramie was just a stopping point. Eventually, duty would likely call her back to Boston, to the life she'd left behind. But as she watched Samuel riding slightly ahead, his broad shoulders set against the backdrop of endless sky and rolling prairie, she couldn't help but feel that something fundamental had shifted within her, something that no amount of rational thinking could undo. Holloway's trading post appeared on the horizon just as Samuel had predicted, a collection of log buildings surrounding a central yard, the American flag fluttering atop the tallest structure. Several horses were hitched outside, and smoke rose from the main building's chimney. "Busier than usual," Samuel observed as they approached. "Stay close to me." They rode into the yard, immediately drawing attention from the men lounging on the porch. Zara felt their evaluating gazes and sat straighter in her saddle, chin lifted in the pose of confidence she'd perfected when facing unruly students or dismissive town councilmen. Samuel dismounted first, then helped her down, his hands lingering briefly at her waist. The protective gesture wasn't lost on the observers, several of whom nodded respectfully to Samuel before returning to their conversations. Inside the trading post, the atmosphere was warm and smoky, the air filled with the scents of tobacco, coffee, and cured leather. A burly man with a gray-streaked beard looked up from behind the counter, his weathered face breaking into a wide smile. "Blackwood, didn't expect to see you this far from Riversbend." His curious gaze shifted to Zara. "And Miss Bishop, if I'm not mistaken. Jacob Holloway, madam, at your service." Zara offered her hand, which the trader took with surprising gentleness. "Mr. Holloway, I believe we met briefly when you delivered supplies to Riversbend last fall." "Indeed we did. You were teaching the youngsters about the solar system, as I recall." "Had them all standing in the street like little planets." She smiled at the memory. "You have a good eye for detail, sir. Comes with the trade." Holloway turned back to Samuel. "What brings you two this way?" "Escorting Miss Bishop to Fort Laramie," Samuel replied. "She's taken a teaching position there." Something like disappointment flickered across Holloway's face. "Riversbend's loss, then. Coffee's fresh if you're interested, and Martha's just pulled bread from the oven." They accepted the offer gratefully, settling at her rough-hewn table near the back of the room. When Martha Holloway, a tiny woman with bright eyes and quick movements, brought them coffee, bread, and preserves, Zara nearly moaned at the simple luxury after trail rations. "We saw riders yesterday," Samuel said quietly to Holloway when the man joined them briefly. 6 or 7 heading north, well armed." Holloway's expression grew serious. "Might be Delaney's bunch. Word is they hit a bank in Cheyenne 3 days ago. Army's looking for them." "Any danger of them coming this way?" "Hard to say. They don't typically target trading posts, not enough reward for the risk, but if you're continuing to Fort Laramie, I'd advise caution." After Holloway moved away to help a customer, Zara leaned forward. "Should we wait here?" "If there are bandits in the area, and if they double back, Holloway's would be an obvious target." Samuel shook his head. "We'll continue as planned, but I'll send a wire to Fort Laramie from here, letting them know to expect us. If we don't arrive within 3 days, they'll send a patrol." Zara nodded, trusting his judgment. While Samuel went to arrange for the telegraph and purchase additional supplies, she remained in the trading post's main room, observing the comings and goings of traders, trappers, and the occasional settler family. A young mother with 2 small children caught her attention. The woman looked exhausted but determined as she bartered for supplies. The older child, a girl of perhaps 6, stared at Zara with undisguised curiosity, particularly at her relatively fine clothes that marked her as different from the typical trading post visitor. Zara smiled at the child, who after a moment's hesitation approached her table. "Are you a real lady?" The girl asked, her eyes wide. Zara couldn't help but laugh. "I suppose I am. My name is Miss Bishop. What's yours?" "Emily Miller. We're going to Oregon." The girl spoke with the straightforward confidence of childhood. "Papa says there's good farmland there." "That's quite an adventure you're on." Emily nodded solemnly. "Mama's scared of Indians, but Papa says most of them are peaceful if you don't steal their land." "Your father sounds like a wise man," Zara said, impressed by the nuanced view being taught to the child. "Emily, don't bother the lady." The mother had noticed her daughters wandering and hurried over, an apologetic expression on her tired face. "She's no bother at all," Zara assured her. "I'm a teacher, actually. Children's questions are my favorite kind." Relief softened the woman's features. "A teacher out here." "In Riversbend, though I'm relocating to Fort Laramie." "Alone?" The woman's concern was evident. "No, I have an escort." Zara's eyes drifted to the doorway where Samuel had just reappeared, his tall frame silhouetted against the bright daylight outside. The woman followed her gaze and smiled knowingly. "Ah, I see." "It's not we're not," Zara began, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "Of course," the woman said, still smiling. "Come along, Emily, we need to help Papa with the supplies." As they walked away, Emily waved cheerfully and Zara returned the gesture, wondering what exactly the woman thought she'd seen in that brief exchange. Samuel returned to the table, seemingly unaware of her flustered state. Wire's been sent. We should reach Jenkins' homestead by nightfall if we leave within the hour. Jenkins, old trapper turned farmer, lets trustworthy travelers camp on his property for a small fee, safer than sleeping in the open, especially now. They departed Holloway's trading post with fresh supplies and valuable information about the trail ahead. Samuel had purchased a detailed map from Holloway, marking potential hazards and safe stopping points for the remainder of their journey. As they rode away, Zara found herself thinking about the Miller family and their long journey to Oregon. "Do you ever think about going further west?" she asked Samuel. He considered the question before answering. "Thought about California once, gold rush days, decided I preferred cows to claims." And now, Samuel glanced at her, something unreadable in his expression. "Now I think a man needs more reason than gold to uproot his life, needs to be following something more valuable, or someone." The words slipped out before she could stop them. His eyes held hers for a long moment. "That would depend entirely on the someone, wouldn't it?" The air between them seemed charged with unspoken possibilities as they continued along the trail, the spring sun warm on their shoulders, and the future stretched before them like the endless Wyoming sky. The trail to Jenkins' homestead took them through varied terrain, open grasslands giving way to scattered stands of pine and aspen as they approached the foothills. Samuel remained vigilant, occasionally stopping to survey their surroundings or examine tracks that crossed their path. "You miss it, don't you?" Zara asked after watching him study a set of hoofprints with practiced eyes. "Being a ranger," Samuel straightened in his saddle, "parts of it, the tracking, the riding, the purpose of it, not the killing. Have you killed many men?" The question was bold, perhaps inappropriate, but Zara had always believed in facing truth directly. 5. His answer came without hesitation, his voice flat. "Each time because there was no other choice. Doesn't make it sit easier." Zara nodded, understanding that for this man, taking a life even justifiably carried weight. It explained something of the gravity she'd always sensed in him, the careful consideration he gave to his actions and words. "The partner you mentioned," she ventured after they'd ridden in silence for a while. "The one who died, what was his name?" "Michael Thornton." Samuel's voice softened. "Had a wife and baby daughter in Austin, smart as a whip and fearless to a fault. That last part got him killed." "What happened, if you don't mind telling me?" Samuel was quiet for so long that Zara thought he might not answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was tight with controlled emotion. "We'd been tracking the Clayton gang for nearly a month. 4 brothers and their cousins who'd robbed banks from Dallas to Austin, caught up to them near the Colorado River. I wanted to wait for backup. We were outnumbered 2-1. Mike thought we'd lose them if we waited." He took a deep breath. He was right about that part, at least. "So you went in." "So we went in, had the element of surprise at first, took down 2 of them before they realized what was happening, then all hell broke loose." Samuel's knuckles whitened on the reins. "I got separated from Mike, heard him shout that he had Thomas Clayton cornered in the barn. By the time I got there, he didn't need to finish." Zara could see the scene in her mind, the younger ranger arriving too late, finding his partner fallen. "It wasn't your fault," she said softly. "Wasn't it? I was the senior ranger, should have insisted we wait for reinforcements." "Did you get them, the ones who killed him?" Samuel nodded once. "Thomas Clayton died that day. The rest were captured within the week. They hanged in Austin that autumn. Did it help seeing justice done?" Helped Mike's widow some, knowing her husband's killers faced punishment. "Didn't bring him back, though." He looked at her then, his eyes shadowed with old pain. "I resigned my commission the day after the hanging, couldn't see myself continuing without him." Zara reached across the space between their horses and placed her hand on his arm. "Thank you for telling me." He covered her hand with his own briefly, the touch sending warmth through her despite the thin leather of his riding gloves. "Never told anyone in Riversbend about it. Funny how easy it is to talk to you." The simple statement held more meaning than perhaps he intended, and Zara found herself wondering again what might have developed between them if she had stayed in Riversbend. If she had known earlier about this deeper side of the quiet ranch foreman who attended every school function and town meeting with steadfast reliability. As afternoon waned toward evening, the landscape began to change, with more trees and the occasional stream cutting through the rolling terrain. Samuel led them down a less traveled path that wound through a stand of cottonwoods. "Jenkins' place is just beyond that rise," he said, pointing to a gentle hill ahead. "We'll have a hot meal and roof tonight." The prospect of comfort after a day in the saddle was appealing, but Zara found herself strangely reluctant to end this part of their journey. Out here, it was just the two of them beneath the vast Wyoming sky, sharing stories and silences with equal ease. At a homestead, there would be others. Conversation would become general rather than intimate, and the bubble that seemed to surround them would inevitably burst. Jenkins' homestead proved to be a tidy collection of log buildings surrounding a central yard. Smoke rose from the main house chimney, and chickens scratched in the dirt near a well-tended vegetable garden. An older man with a full white beard emerged from the barn as they approached, a shotgun held casually but visibly in his hands. "State your business," he called as they stopped at a respectful distance. "Samuel Blackwood and Zara Bishop," Samuel replied calmly. "Holloway said you might have room for travelers tonight." Jenkins lowered his shotgun slightly, squinting at them. "Blackwood, the foreman from Riversbend." "Yes, sir. Holloway mentioned you might be coming through." The old man fully lowered his weapon. "Any trouble on the trail?" "None we couldn't avoid. Heard Delaney's gang might be in the area." Jenkins spat to the side. "Army patrols came through yesterday looking for them. Said they robbed the bank in Cheyenne, shot the teller for no good reason." He gestured toward the barn. "You can stable your horses there. 2 bits each for you, includes dinner and breakfast. The missus puts on a good spread." As they dismounted and led their horses toward the barn, Zara noticed other travelers already settled, a freight driver with his team resting in the corral, and what appeared to be a young couple sitting on the porch of a small cabin adjacent to the main house. "Jenkins takes in more travelers than I expected," she commented quietly to Samuel. "He's well positioned between settlements. Place has a reputation for safety and fair dealing." Samuel helped her unsaddle her palomino. "He and Mrs. Jenkins lost their children to fever years back. I think the company helps." The evening at Jenkins' homestead unfolded pleasantly. Mrs. Jenkins proved to be a lively woman whose cooking lived up to her husband's promise: venison stew, fresh bread, and apple pie that reminded Zara of home. Around the large dining table, conversation flowed easily among the travelers. The freight driver, Silas Cooper, had news from Cheyenne and points east. The young couple, newlyweds Thomas and Mary Parker, were headed to Oregon Territory to start a new life, much like the Miller family Zara had met at Holloway's. "Is it true the railroad's coming through near Riversbend?" Cooper asked between bites of stew. "Heard they're laying track faster than expected," Samuel nodded. 10 miles south, town councils divided on whether it's salvation or damnation. "Death knell for towns like that," Jenkins opined, wiping his beard with a napkin. "Railroad comes, new town springs up around the station, old settlements wither. Seen it happen a dozen times." "That's partly why I'm relocating to Fort Laramie," Zara explained. "The school in Riversbend is closing." "Shame," Mrs. Jenkins said. "Children need learning, especially out here." The conversation shifted to other topics: the unusually wet spring, predictions for summer grazing conditions, news of Indian movements further north. Throughout the meal, Zara was acutely aware of Samuel beside her, his occasional comments thoughtful and measured. She noticed how others at the table deferred to his quiet authority, seeking his opinion on matters from the safest trails to the likelihood of beef prices rising. Later, as the travelers dispersed to their assigned sleeping quarters, Zara found herself standing on the porch of the small cabin she would share with Mrs. Parker, while the men would sleep in the bunkhouse. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamond dust across the velvet sky. "Beautiful evening," Samuel said, joining her at the porch railing. "It is." She turned to face him, struck by how the moonlight silvered his features. "Thank you for arranging this stop. It's nice to sleep under a roof. We'll make Fort Laramie in 2 more days if the weather holds." He seemed hesitant, unlike his usual decisive self. "Zara, I've been thinking." "There you are, Mr. Blackwood." Mrs. Jenkins appeared in the doorway of the main house. "My husband would like a word before you turn in. Something about that stallion of his you admired earlier." Samuel's expression flickered with what might have been frustration before he nodded politely. "Of course." "Good night, Miss Bishop." "Good night, Mr. Blackwood," she replied formally, aware of Mrs. Jenkins' presence. As she watched him walk away, Zara wondered what he had been about to say. The intensity in his eyes had suggested something important, something personal. Now she would have to wait until morning to discover what thoughts had been occupying his mind. Inside the small cabin, Mary Parker was already preparing for bed, brushing out her long brown hair. She smiled shyly at Zara. "You and Mr. Blackwood make a handsome couple." "Oh, we're not," Zara began the now familiar denial. "He's just escorting me to Fort Laramie." Mary's expression was knowing. "My Thomas looked at me the same way before he found the courage to speak his heart. Like I was water in the desert and he was dying of thirst." Heat rose to Zara's cheeks. "I'm sure you're mistaken." "Perhaps." Mary climbed into one of the narrow beds. "But I've seen how he watches you when you're not looking and how you watch him too." Zara had no response to that observation, uncomfortably accurate as it was. Instead, she busied herself with her own preparations for bed, though sleep proved elusive as her mind replayed every interaction, every glance exchanged with Samuel throughout their journey. Morning came with the crowing of Jenkins' roosters and the scent of coffee and bacon wafting from the main house. Zara dressed quickly, eager to be on the trail again, eager, if she was honest with herself, to resume the private conversations with Samuel that had been interrupted by their stop at the homestead. She found him already in the barn, checking their horses and adjusting tack with methodical care. In the golden morning light filtering through the barn doors, he looked solid and dependable, a man rooted in the practicalities of frontier life. "You're up early," he commented without looking up from his work. "I could say the same for you." She approached her palomino, stroking the horse's velvety nose. "Did you sleep well?" "Well enough." He finished tightening a strap before finally meeting her gaze. "Jenkins says there's a storm coming. We should try to reach Miller's Creek by nightfall. There's a way station there where we can wait it out if necessary." Is that what he wanted to discuss last night? The weather? Samuel's hand stilled on the saddle. "No, he wanted to offer me a job. His foreman's moving on, heading to California. Jenkins needs someone experienced to take over." Zara's heart seemed to skip a beat. "Are you considering it? It's good land. Fair wages. Jenkins is getting on in years, says he'd consider selling to the right person eventually." He adjusted the stirrup, not meeting her eyes. "Might be a chance to build something of my own." "It sounds like a fine opportunity." She kept her voice carefully neutral despite the sudden hollow feeling in her chest. If Samuel took this position, their paths would truly diverge after Fort Laramie. The possibility of seeing him again would diminish to nearly nothing. "I told him I'd think on it." Samuel finally looked at her directly. "Seems like a time for new beginnings all around." Before she could respond, Jenkins himself entered the barn, followed by Cooper, the freight driver. The moment for private conversation had passed, and soon they were caught up in the bustle of departure breakfast in the main house, settling accounts with Jenkins, exchanging farewell pleasantries with the other travelers. As they rode away from the homestead, dark clouds were indeed gathering on the western horizon, though the morning remained clear and mild. Samuel set a brisker pace than the previous days, clearly concerned about outrunning the approaching weather. "Tell me about Fort Laramie," he said after they'd ridden in silence for nearly an hour. "What will you teach there?" Grateful for the neutral topic, Zara described her correspondence with the fort's commander and the plans for expanding educational opportunities for both the soldiers' children and those of nearby settlers. "They're establishing a proper school building this summer," she explained. "Until then, classes will be held in a section of the officers' quarters. The commander's wife is particularly supportive. She was a teacher herself before her marriage." "Sounds promising," Samuel said, though something in his tone suggested reservation. "Different from Riversbend." "Very different. More structure, more resources." She glanced at him. "Less freedom in some ways, I imagine. Military posts have their own hierarchies and rules." "Will that suit you, after 2 years of running your schoolroom as you saw fit?" It was a perceptive question, one that touched on doubts she'd been carefully avoiding. "I hope so. The position comes with security that Riversbend couldn't offer." "Security has its value," he acknowledged, "though sometimes I wonder if we sacrifice too much in pursuit of it." The conversation lapsed as they navigated a steeper section of trail, the horses picking their way carefully over rocky ground. By midday, the western sky had darkened considerably, and a cool wind had begun to blow, carrying the scent of rain. They stopped briefly to rest the horses and eat a cold lunch, both of them watching the approaching storm clouds with concern. "We won't make Miller's Creek before that hits," Samuel said, squinting at the horizon. "There's a line shack about 5 miles ahead that belongs to the Circle T Ranch. Not comfortable, but it's solid." Zara nodded, trusting his judgment. They quickly resumed their journey, pushing the horses to a faster pace as the wind strengthened and the first distant rumbles of thunder reached them. The line shack proved to be a crude but sturdy log structure nestled in a small hollow protected by pine trees. They reached it just as the first heavy raindrops began to fall, quickly unsaddling the horses and securing them in a lean-to attached to the cabin before hurrying inside with their supplies. The interior was Spartan but clean, a single room with a small cast iron stove, a rough table with 2 stools, and a narrow cot against one wall. Samuel immediately set about starting a fire in the stove while Zara arranged their saddlebags and bedrolls. "Not exactly the accommodations I promised," he said as the kindling caught and began to burn, "but it'll keep us dry." "It's perfect," she assured him, genuinely grateful for the shelter as rain now lashed against the single window and thunder boomed overhead. The storm's sudden ferocity made conversation difficult, so they worked in companionable silence, Samuel tending the fire and checking that the roof didn't leak, Zara organizing their supplies and preparing a simple meal from their provisions. As the stove warmed the small space and the rich aroma of coffee filled the air, Zara found herself hyper-aware of their isolation and proximity. In the settlements and at Jenkins' homestead, there had been others around, social conventions to observe. Here they were truly alone, cut off from the world by the raging storm. "Should ease by morning," Samuel said, returning from a quick check on the horses. Rain dripped from his hat and coat as he hung them near the stove to dry. "Horses are fine, found some extra feed in the lean-to." Zara handed him a cup of hot coffee, their fingers brushing in the exchange. "The delay won't cause problems for our journey. We'll still make Fort Laramie on schedule or close to it." He settled onto one of the stools, stretching his long legs toward the stove's warmth. "Might be a blessing in disguise. Gives the army more time to track down Delaney's gang before we continue." They ate a simple dinner as darkness fell, the storm continuing unabated outside. The small cabin creaked and groaned with the force of the wind, but remained sturdy and dry. "You should take the cot," Samuel said as they cleared away their meal. "I'll make do on the floor." "That hardly seems fair. We could," Zara stopped herself, suddenly aware of what she'd been about to suggest. Sharing the narrow cot would be scandalously inappropriate, regardless of how practical it might be in the cold cabin. Samuel's expression remained neutral, though a muscle twitched in his jaw. "I've slept on worse than a wooden floor, Miss Bishop." The return to formality wasn't lost on Zara. It was a reminder of boundaries, of propriety that must be maintained despite their isolated circumstances. "At least take my bedroll as well as yours," she insisted. "There's no sense in both of us being uncomfortable." He nodded his agreement, and they set about preparing for the night. Zara took longer than necessary with her modest ablutions, using water from a barrel in the corner that collected rainwater from the roof. When she finally settled onto the cot, Samuel had arranged his bedroll near the stove and was adding another log to the fire. The storm had settled into a steady downpour, less violent but persistent. In the dim light from the stove, shadows danced across the cabin walls and Samuel's profile as he sat on his bedroll, removing his boots. "Samuel," she said softly, using his given name deliberately. "What were you going to say last night, on the porch at Jenkins' place?" He went still, then set his boots aside with careful precision before answering. "I was going to ask what you really want, Zara. What I want from your life, from your future." He looked at her then, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "You're running from Boston by going to Fort Laramie, but what are you running toward?" The question struck at the heart of uncertainties she'd been carrying since making the decision to leave Riversbend. "I don't know," she admitted. "Security, perhaps, purpose. Those are fine things." His voice was gentle. "But are they enough? What more should there be? Connection, belonging, joy. He hesitated before adding quietly, love. The word hung in the air between them, weighted with possibility. I had those things in Riversbend, she said, hardly above a whisper. With my students, with the community. Yes, but it wasn't sustainable. The school closing, life changes, places change. He shifted to face her more directly. But that doesn't mean you have to abandon everything and everyone. Zara sat up on the cot, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. What are you saying, Samuel? I'm saying that when I saw you trying to leave at dawn, something in me couldn't let you go without. He ran a hand through his hair, frustration evident in the gesture. Without showing you there might be another path. What other path? Samuel stood and moved to sit beside her on the cot, maintaining a respectful distance but close enough that she could see the earnestness in his eyes. Stay in Wyoming. Not necessarily Riversbend, though the town might survive the railroad after all, but somewhere you can build a life on your terms. And where would that be? Jenkins' homestead, Fort Laramie? Wherever you choose. He took a deep breath. Wherever you find your purpose, your happiness. There was something he wasn't saying, something in his careful phrasing that suggested he was holding back. Zara found herself needing complete honesty between them. And what about you? Where will you find your happiness, Samuel Blackwood? The question seemed to catch him off guard. He looked away toward the stove where flames flickered behind the iron grating. I've been thinking about that a lot these past months, even before Jenkins' offer. And, when he looked back at her, the raw emotion in his eyes took her breath away. For a long time after Michael died, I didn't think I deserved happiness. Figured the best I could hope for was purpose, usefulness. Riversbend gave me that. Being foreman for the Double R, serving on the town council, it was enough. But now I find myself wanting more. His voice had dropped to little more than a whisper. Wanting a future that includes more than just work and duty, wanting someone to share that future with. Zara's heart hammered in her chest. Samuel, I know it's not fair. You're starting fresh at Fort Laramie, and I have no right to complicate that. He stood abruptly, moving back toward his bedroll. Forget I said anything. We should get some sleep if we're going to make up time tomorrow. No, Zara rose from the cot, letting the blanket fall away. You don't get to say these things and then retreat, not after coming all this way with me. Samuel turned back, his expression guarded. What would you have me say, Zara? That watching you teach those children in Riversbend made me see what kind of mother you'd be to my own someday. That every time you spoke up at town meetings, challenging the old ways of thinking, I fell a little more in love with your mind. That I've been finding excuses to be near you for 2 years and still haven't worked up the courage to properly court you. His words washed over her like a wave, leaving her breathless and unsteady. Why didn't you say something sooner? You were the schoolteacher, educated, refined. I'm a former ranger turned ranch hand with blood on his hands and not much to offer beyond hard work and loyalty. That's not how I see you at all, she said, taking a step toward him. How do you see me then? The vulnerability in his question made her heart ache. I see a man of integrity, of kindness. I see someone who commands respect not through force but through fairness. She took another step closer. I see someone who was already saddled at dawn, ready to ride beside me when I needed him most, even though I didn't know I needed anyone. Samuel remained still, as if afraid any movement might shatter the moment. And what does that mean for us, for your plans? I don't know yet, she answered honestly. But I do know that these past days with you have made me question everything I thought I wanted, made me wonder if perhaps what I've been searching for has been in front of me all along. He closed the remaining distance between them slowly, giving her every chance to retreat. When he stood before her, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him, he raised a hand to gently brush a strand of hair from her face. I'm not asking you to change your plans for me, he said softly. I'm asking you to consider if those plans truly lead to what you want most. And if they don't, her voice trembled slightly, then know that wherever you choose to go, whatever you choose to do, I would be proud to stand beside you. His hand cupped her cheek with infinite tenderness. If you'll have me. Zara covered his hand with her own, turning her face slightly to press a kiss against his palm. The gesture was small but significant, an acknowledgement of feelings too new and overwhelming to fully express in words. We still have 2 days to Fort Laramie, she said. Perhaps by then I'll know my own heart better. Samuel nodded, understanding in his eyes. Slowly, reluctantly, he withdrew his hand and stepped back. We should rest. Tomorrow will be a long day. As they settled into their separate sleeping places, Zara on the cot, Samuel on his bedroll near the stove, a new awareness hummed between them, full of possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Outside, the storm continued its steady drumming against the cabin roof, but inside, a different kind of storm had broken, one that would reshape the landscape of their lives in ways neither could fully anticipate. Morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having blown itself out during the night. Puddles dotted the ground outside the line shack, reflecting the brilliant blue sky, and birds sang with renewed enthusiasm in the surrounding pines. Zara woke to find Samuel already up, the stove rekindled and coffee brewing. He stood by the window, gazing out at the freshly washed landscape, his profile outlined by the golden morning light. Something in his posture, a new ease, perhaps suggested that, regardless of her eventual decision, a weight had been lifted from him by finally speaking his heart. "Good morning," she said, sitting up and smoothing her hair. He turned, a small smile warming his features. "Morning, storms past, should be good traveling weather." They moved through their morning routine with newfound awareness of each other's small glances, careful courtesies, the occasional brush of hands that sent warmth spreading through Zara's body. Neither mentioned their conversation from the night before, as if by unspoken agreement they would let the revelation settle between them without pressure. After a simple breakfast, they saddled the horses and prepared to depart. The trail was muddy but passable, and Samuel led them on a slightly different route that would avoid the worst of the waterlogged areas. "We'll still reach Miller's Creek by midday," he explained as they rode side by side where the trail permitted. "Can rest the horses there and push on to Eagle Bluff by nightfall. It's a longer day than I'd planned, but it puts us within easy reach of Fort Laramie tomorrow." Zara nodded, appreciating his practical approach despite the emotional undercurrents now flowing between them. "Will we stay at another homestead tonight? Eagle Bluff has a small inn, nothing fancy but clean beds and hot food." He glanced at her, a hint of uncertainty in his expression. "Unless you'd prefer camping." "The inn sounds perfect," she assured him, understanding his concern about propriety now that their feelings were acknowledged. They rode in companionable silence for a time, enjoying the fresh sense of pine and wet earth that the storm had awakened. Zara found her thoughts continually returning to Samuel's words from the previous night, weighing them against her plans and ambitions. "Tell me about Jenkins' offer," she said eventually. "Would you really consider it?" Samuel adjusted his hat before answering. "It's good land. Self-sufficient operation, cattle, crops, even some horses. Jenkins has built something that could last generations with the right stewardship. And you could provide that stewardship." "I believe so." There was no arrogance in his assessment, just quiet confidence. "Been saving most of my wages these past years. Not enough to buy outright, but Jenkins mentioned terms that might work over time. You'd be putting down permanent roots." He looked at her directly then. "Yes, something I've been considering for a while now." The implication was clear. His future plans had room for more than just himself. The question was whether she could see herself as part of that future. "What about you?" he asked. "If Fort Laramie doesn't prove to be what you're hoping for, what then?" "I hadn't thought beyond it," she admitted. The position seemed like the perfect solution when Riversbend school was closing. "And now," Zara considered the question carefully. "Now I'm not sure. These past days have reminded me how much I love the openness of this country, the freedom it represents. Fort Laramie will be more constrained. Military posts usually are, but there will be children who need teaching," she said, as much to herself as to him. "That hasn't changed. Children need teaching everywhere," Samuel observed. "Including places where you might build your own school someday, rather than serving someone else's vision." The idea caught her imagination, having her own school, creating a curriculum that truly served the needs of frontier children, being answerable to her own principles rather than a military commander or town council. "That would require resources I don't have," she said, though the seed had been planted. "Perhaps it would require partnership." Samuel's tone was carefully neutral, but the suggestion was clear. They reached Miller's Creek around noon, as Samuel had predicted, a small settlement consisting of a trading post, livery stable, and a few scattered buildings. They stopped long enough to rest and water the horses, purchase a few supplies, and inquire about conditions on the trail ahead. The trading post owner confirmed that an army patrol had passed through the previous day, still searching for Delaney's gang. Said they'd tracked them north of here, the man told Samuel. Heading toward the Black Hills, they reckon. You two should have clear sailing to Fort Laramie. This news lightened the mood considerably as they continued their journey. With the immediate threat of encountering outlaws diminished, they could focus on covering ground and arriving safely at their destination. The landscape grew more varied as they traveled east. Rolling hills gave way to dramatic rock formations. Streams swollen with rainwater crossed their path, and wildflowers carpeted meadows in brilliant displays of color. Zara found herself storing these images in her memory, uncertain when or if she would travel this way again. They spoke of many things as they rode. Samuel shared stories of his ranger days that weren't tinged with tragedy, and Zara described her early teaching experiences in Boston before coming west. They discovered shared tastes in literature and similar views on politics, finding common ground that deepened their connection beyond the attraction that had first drawn them to each other. By late afternoon, Eagle Bluff came into view, a cluster of buildings nestled at the base of a distinctive rock formation that gave the settlement its name. It was larger than Miller's Creek, with several businesses lining its main street and the Promised Inn standing prominently at the town center. The Prairie Rose Inn proved to be a pleasant surprise, a two-story clapboard building with clean rooms, a dining room that served surprisingly good food, and a small parlor where guests could gather in the evening. The proprietor, Mrs. Caldwell, was a widow who ran the establishment with brisk efficiency and a keen eye for detail. 2 rooms, then? She asked as Samuel arranged their accommodations. 1 for you and 1 for the lady. Yes, madam, Samuel confirmed. We'll be departing for Fort Laramie in the morning, Mrs. Caldwell's expression brightened. Fort Laramie, my nephew's stationed there, Lieutenant James Caldwell. Perhaps you'll meet him, Miss Bishop, Zara supplied. Zara Bishop, I'm to be the new teacher at the fort. A teacher, how wonderful. They've needed one desperately, from what Jimmy writes. Mrs. Caldwell led them upstairs to adjacent rooms at the front of the building. Dinner's at 6 sharp. We've got roast beef tonight and fresh apple pie. After settling into their rooms and refreshing themselves from the day's journey, Zara and Samuel met in the dining room, which was already filling with other travelers and a few local residents. The meal was indeed excellent, and the conversation around them provided a pleasant backdrop without requiring their participation. When they had finished eating, Samuel suggested a short walk to stretch their legs before retiring. The evening was mild, with a gentle breeze carrying the scent of sage and distant rain, though the sky remained clear overhead. They strolled along Eagle Bluff's main street, past closed shops and the still active saloon where piano music and laughter spilled into the night. At the edge of town, they stopped by a small creek that gurgled cheerfully over smooth stones. One more day, Samuel said, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. By this time tomorrow, you'll be at Fort Laramie starting your new life. Yes. Zara gazed at the water reflecting the emerging stars. It seems strange now, after everything that's happened since I left Riversbend. Do you regret it, leaving? She considered the question carefully. No, if I hadn't left, we wouldn't be here now. You wouldn't have accompanied me, and we might never have spoken of. What matters? Samuel turned to face her, his expression serious in the fading light. And what matters to you, Zara? Truly, purpose, connection. She echoed his words from the night before, then added softly, you. His breath caught audibly. Are you saying I'm saying that I don't know exactly what my future holds, but I know I want you to be part of it? She took a step closer to him. The position at Fort Laramie is for 6 months initially, perhaps. Perhaps that's time enough to determine what comes next, for both of us. Samuel's eyes searched hers, hope warring with caution in his gaze. I don't want you sacrificing your dreams for mine. What if our dreams could align? What if there's a path forward that serves both our purposes? She reached for his hand, feeling his strong fingers entwine with hers. You spoke of partnership. I think I'd like to explore what that might mean. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to withdraw, Samuel raised his free hand to cup her cheek. May I kiss you, Zara Bishop? Her answer was to rise on tiptoes, closing the distance between them until their lips met in a kiss that began gently but quickly deepened with the release of long, restrained emotion. His arms encircled her waist, drawing her closer while her hands moved to his shoulders, feeling the solid strength beneath his shirt. When they finally parted, both breathing unevenly, Samuel rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that since the 4th of July picnic 2 years ago. Zara laughed softly. The one where I was wearing the blue dress, with the silver pins in your hair, he confirmed, smiling. You looked like something from another world, too fine, too bright for a dusty Wyoming town. And now you look like you belong exactly where you are. His thumb traced the curve of her cheek. Wherever that might be, they walked back to the inn with hands linked, separating reluctantly when they reached their rooms. The propriety that had governed their interactions thus far remained important, especially now that their feelings were acknowledged and their future uncertain but hopeful. Good night, Zara, Samuel said, his voice low as they stood in the hallway between their doors. Good night, Samuel. She hesitated, then added softly, Thank you for being ready to ride beside me when I tried to leave. I didn't know how much I needed you until you were there. His smile in response was tender, full of promise and possibility. I'll always be there, all you have to do is let me. With one last shared look, they retreated to their separate rooms, each carrying new dreams that had not existed when dawn broke that morning. The final day of their journey dawned with golden light streaming through Zara's window, promising perfect weather for the ride to Fort Laramie. She dressed with particular care, selecting her most presentable traveling outfit for her arrival at what would be her home for at least the next 6 months. Yet as she pinned her hair and straightened her collar, Zara found her thoughts not on the position awaiting her, but on the man who had transformed what should have been a simple journey into a profound turning point in her life. Samuel was already in the dining room when she came downstairs, deep in conversation with a weather-beaten man who appeared to be a local rancher. He rose when he saw her, a warm smile lighting his features in a way that made her heart flutter. Good morning, he said, pulling out a chair for her. I hope you slept well. Very well, thank you. She settled at the table, noting the fresh coffee and plate of eggs and biscuits already waiting for her. You've been busy this morning. Just getting the latest news from Mr. Thornton here. Samuel gestured to the rancher. Army caught up with 2 of Delaney's men yesterday near the Black Hills. Rest of the gang's believed to be heading for Montana territory. Good news for travelers, the rancher added, nodding to Zara. Road to the fort should be clear as a whistle for you folks. After breakfast, they settled their account with Mrs. Caldwell, who pressed a small package into Zara's hands. Apple tarts for your journey, she explained, and a letter for my nephew if you wouldn't mind delivering it. Of course, Zara assured her, touched by the woman's kindness. I'll see that Lieutenant Caldwell receives it personally. Their departure from Eagle Bluff was without ceremony, yet Zara felt a strange significance to this last leg of their journey together. Everything had changed since they'd left Riversbend, or perhaps more accurately, everything that had been unspoken between them had finally found voice. They rode side by side where the trail allowed, their horses maintaining a steady pace that would bring them to Fort Laramie by mid-afternoon. The countryside grew more populated as they traveled, with homesteads and small farms dotting the landscape. Nervous? Samuel asked after they'd ridden in comfortable silence for a time. A little, Zara admitted. It's strange to think that by nightfall I'll be settling into quarters at the fort, preparing to meet my new students. They'll be fortunate to have you as their teacher. I hope so, she glanced at him. What about you? Will you return to Riversbend immediately? Samuel adjusted his hat, considering the question. Thought I might stay a day or two, make sure you're properly settled, then head back, perhaps with a detour to speak with Jenkins again about his offer. You're seriously considering it then, more seriously than before. His eyes met hers briefly, conveying what he didn't say aloud, that his decision would be influenced by their evolving relationship. It's a good opportunity. How far is Jenkins' place from Fort Laramie? Zara asked, the practical question revealing her own thoughts about their future. 2 days' ride, less if the weather's good and the horses are fresh. His lips curved in a small smile, close enough for regular visits if a person were so inclined. That's good to know. She returned his smile, warmth spreading through her at the implicit understanding between them. As the morning progressed into afternoon, signs of military presence became more evident. Occasional patrols passed them on the road. And finally, the impressive outline of Fort Laramie itself appeared on the horizon. Built at the confluence of the Laramie and North Platte rivers, Fort Laramie had evolved from a simple trading post to one of the most important military installations on the frontier. Its whitewashed buildings and parade ground represented civilization and order in the midst of wilderness. As they approached the fort's entrance, Zara felt a curious mixture of anticipation and reluctance. This place represented security, purpose, advancement in her career, yet it also meant separation from Samuel, at least temporarily, and a return to the constraints of society after days of relative freedom on the trail. The sentry at the gate directed them to the headquarters building after learning Zara's identity. "The commander's been expecting you, Miss Bishop," he informed her, said to bring you directly to him upon arrival. They dismounted in front of an imposing 2-story building, and Samuel helped Zara down from her horse, his hands lingering at her waist a moment longer than necessary. "Ready?" he asked quietly. "As I'll ever be," she replied, straightening her jacket and adjusting her hat. Inside headquarters, they were escorted to the commander's office, where Colonel James Barrett, a distinguished officer in his 50s with silver-streaked dark hair and a neatly trimmed beard, greeted them warmly. "Miss Bishop, we're delighted you've arrived safely." He shook her hand before turning to Samuel. "And you must be Mr. Blackwood. I received a wire from Holloway's trading post mentioning you were escorting our new teacher." "Yes, sir," Samuel confirmed. "Wanted to ensure Miss Bishop reached the fort without incident." "A gentleman and a wise precaution, given the recent outlaw activity." The colonel returned to his desk. "Miss Bishop, my wife has prepared quarters for you in the officers' section. School will commence next Monday, giving you time to settle in and meet the families. We have 28 children currently in need of education, ranging from 5 to 16 years of age." "That's a significant number," Zara observed. "More than I taught in Riversbend. The fort population has grown considerably this past year. We're now an important supply depot for campaigns further north, which means more permanent personnel and their families." Colonel Barrett shuffled through some papers on his desk. "Mrs. Barrett will show you the classroom space tomorrow. She's quite excited about the educational materials that arrived last month from St. Louis." The conversation continued with details of her position, living arrangements, and expectations. Throughout, Samuel remained a quiet presence at her side, respectful but attentive. Zara found herself drawing strength from his nearness as she absorbed the information that would shape her new life. "Now, Mr. Blackwood," the colonel said finally, turning his attention to Samuel, "we've prepared guest quarters for you for tonight. I understand from Miss Bishop's letter that you'll be returning to Riversbend?" "Yes, sir, after ensuring Miss Bishop is properly settled." "Excellent. The fort owes you its gratitude for delivering our teacher safely." Colonel Barrett stood, signaling the end of the meeting. "Sergeant Mills will show you both to your quarters. Dinner is served in the officers' mess at 6. You're both welcome to join us." Outside headquarters, they followed the sergeant across the parade ground toward the residential section of the fort. Zara felt strangely disconnected from her surroundings, the neat buildings, the soldiers drilling in the distance, the ordered activity of military life. After days on the trail with just Samuel for company, the fort seemed overwhelming in its bustle and formality. "Are you all right?" Samuel asked quietly as they walked, noticing her expression. "Yes, just adjusting," she replied. "It's different from what I expected. Larger, more regimented." She glanced at the soldiers standing at attention as an officer passed. "I knew it would be military, of course, but seeing it in person. It's a different world from Riversbend," he acknowledged, "but you'll adapt, you always do." His confidence in her was heartening, though Zara couldn't shake the sensation that she'd arrived at a crossroads far more significant than a simple change of employment. The sergeant showed Samuel to his quarters, first a small but comfortable room in the visitors' section. before leading Zara to her own accommodations in the officers' area. Her quarters proved to be more spacious than expected. A sitting room with attached bedroom, simply but adequately furnished, with large windows overlooking the parade ground. Mrs. Barrett had it prepared special, Sergeant Mills informed her, said a teacher needs proper space to prepare lessons. Left alone to settle in, Zara unpacked her saddlebags and the small trunk that had been delivered from the fort's storage area where it had awaited her arrival. Her few possessions looked lost in the relatively large space, emphasizing how transitional this situation might be. A soft knock at her door interrupted her unpacking. Opening it, she found Mrs. Barrett, a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a welcoming smile. "Miss Bishop, I'm so pleased to meet you at last." Mrs. Barrett entered with the easy confidence of someone accustomed to authority. "I hope you find your quarters satisfactory." "They're lovely, Mrs. Barrett, far more spacious than I anticipated. Education is a priority for both the Colonel and myself." Mrs. Barrett moved to the window, adjusting the curtains slightly. "Our son benefited from excellent teachers back east before he entered West Point. We believe the children here deserve no less, despite our frontier location." They chatted amicably about the fort, the families Zara would be teaching, and the educational materials available. Mrs. Barrett proved to be knowledgeable and passionate about education, confirming what the Colonel had mentioned about her own teaching background. "And your escort, Mr. Blackwood," Mrs. Barrett said casually as their conversation drew to a close. "He seems quite protective of you." Zara felt heat rise to her cheeks. "We've known each other since I arrived in Riversbend 2 years ago. He very kindly offered to accompany me when he learned I was traveling to Fort Laramie." "Very kind indeed, Mrs. Barrett agreed, a knowing glint in her eyes that suggested she recognized something deeper than mere courtesy in Samuel's actions. "Will he be returning to Riversbend immediately?" "Tomorrow or the next day, I believe." "Well, we must ensure he carries back favorable reports of our fort, Mrs. Barrett moved toward the door. "I look forward to introducing you both at dinner this evening. The officers and their wives are eager to meet our new teacher." After Mrs. Barrett's departure, Zara completed her unpacking and freshened up for dinner, changing into one of her better dresses, a deep blue with subtle trim that had been a splurge before leaving Boston. As she arranged her hair, she found herself wondering what Samuel would think of her more formal appearance after days of seeing her in practical traveling clothes. A knock at her door precisely at 5:30 announced his arrival to escort her to dinner. When she opened the door, the appreciation in his eyes as he took in her appearance was unmistakable. "You look beautiful," he said simply. "Thank you." She noted that he had also made an effort with his appearance. His hair was neatly combed, his shirt crisp, and he wore a vest she hadn't seen during their journey. "You clean up rather well yourself, Mr. Blackwood." His smile deepened at her teasing tone. "Figured I should make a good impression on your new colleagues." The officers' mess was housed in a large building adjacent to headquarters. Inside, tables were arranged with white cloths and proper settings, a level of formality Zara hadn't experienced since leaving Boston. Colonel and Mrs. Barrett greeted them at the entrance, introducing them to the assembled officers and their wives. Dinner proved to be a somewhat overwhelming experience after the quiet intimacy of their journey. Zara found herself seated between a lieutenant's wife and the fort's surgeon, with Samuel placed further down the table among junior officers. Throughout the meal, she was peppered with questions about her background, her teaching experience, and her impressions of Wyoming territory. She answered graciously while trying to keep track of the many names and faces being presented to her. Occasionally, her eyes would meet Samuel's across the table, and in those brief exchanges, she found an anchor in the sea of unfamiliar faces, a reminder of the connection they had forged during their journey. After dinner, the party moved to an adjoining room where coffee was served. Zara found herself surrounded by mothers eager to discuss their children's education, while Samuel was engaged in conversation with several officers about conditions in the territory. "Your Mr. Blackwood seems quite knowledgeable about the region, Mrs. Barrett commented, appearing at Zara's elbow during a momentary lull in her conversations. "He was a Texas Ranger before coming to Wyoming," Zara explained. "His experience has been invaluable during our journey." I imagine so, Mrs. Barrett's expression was thoughtful as she observed Samuel across the room. It's rare to find men of true character on the frontier, Miss Bishop. My husband speaks highly of his assessment of the situation with Delaney's gang, says Mr. Blackwood has the makings of an excellent scout or lawman, should he ever tire of ranch work. The comment surprised Zara. She hadn't been aware that Samuel had discussed the outlaw situation in such detail with the colonel. He's an excellent ranch foreman. The double R in Riversbend has prospered under his management. No doubt, Mrs. Barrett smiled slightly. Yet I suspect his talents extend beyond cattle. Men like that are always in demand at frontier posts. Before Zara could consider the implications of this observation, Lieutenant Caldwell approached to introduce himself and receive his aunt's letter. As the evening progressed, Zara found herself increasingly fatigued from the journey and the social demands of her arrival. When she caught Samuel's eye across the room, a silent understanding passed between them, and he smoothly made his way to her side. "Miss Bishop looks tired after your long journey," he said to Mrs. Barrett. "Perhaps I should escort her back to her quarters." "Of course, Mrs. Barrett agreed readily. "You both must be exhausted. We've monopolized your time quite enough for one evening." Their departure was graciously expedited by the colonel, who expressed again his gratitude to Samuel and his welcome to Zara. As they walked across the now quiet parade ground, the full moon illuminated their path and cast long shadows from the fort buildings. "Quite a different world," Samuel observed, his voice low in the night stillness. "Very different," Zara agreed. "Everyone has been welcoming, but it's not what you expected." "I'm not sure what I expected." She slowed her pace, reluctant to reach her quarters and end their time together. "The position is excellent, better resources than Riversbend could ever provide, more students, support from the commander and his wife." "But," Samuel prompted gently, "but it feels confined, structured in a way that leaves little room for the kind of teaching I did in Riversbend." She glanced at him. "Is that ungrateful of me, to be offered such an opportunity and immediately find fault?" "It's honest," he replied. "And honesty matters more than gratitude in this case." They had reached her quarters, but neither made a move to end their conversation. Instead, they stood in the shadow of the building, the sounds of the fort at night, distant sentries calling to each other, the occasional whinny of horses from the stables creating a backdrop to their private moment. "What did you think of the colonel's offer?" Zara asked. "Mrs. Barrett mentioned he was impressed with your knowledge." Samuel looked surprised. "It wasn't a formal offer, just a comment that the fort could use men with my experience as scouts or irregular cavalry." "Would you consider it? If it were offered formally?" He was quiet for a moment, considering. "A few weeks ago I might have. It's good pay, important work." His eyes met hers in the moonlight. "But now I'm thinking about Jenkins' offer, about building something of my own, something that could last." The implication was clear, and Zara's heart quickened at the future suggested in his words. "Samuel, I'm not asking for answers tonight," he said softly. "You've just arrived. You should take time to know this place, these people, the work you'll be doing here." "And if I already know what I want?" The boldness of her question surprised even herself. Samuel stepped closer, his hand rising to gently cup her cheek. "Then I'd say we both have some planning to do, but not tonight. Tonight you should rest and prepare for your new role. Will you come see me tomorrow, before you decide when to leave? Try and stop me." His thumb brushed lightly across her cheekbone. "I didn't ride all this way with you just to disappear at the first sign of military brass." Zara laughed softly, some of the tension easing from her shoulders. "I'm glad. I find I've grown quite accustomed to your company, Mr. Blackwood." "Have you now?" His smile was visible even in the dim light. "That's fortunate, Miss Bishop, as I've become rather attached to yours as well." The moment stretched between them, filled with unspoken promises and possibilities. Finally, with obvious reluctance, Samuel stepped back. "Good night, Zara." "Sleep well." "Good night, Samuel." She watched him walk away across the moonlit parade ground, his tall figure gradually disappearing into the shadows. Only when he was out of sight did she enter her quarters, her mind whirling with thoughts of the day, the evening, and most of all, the man who had transformed a simple journey into something far more profound. The next morning dawned bright and clear. with the crisp efficiency of military routine evident in the bugle calls and orderly activity visible from Zara's window. She dressed carefully, preparing for Mrs. Barrett's promised tour of the classroom and introduction to some of her future students. The classroom space proved to be larger and better equipped than she had anticipated, a converted storehouse with proper desks, a blackboard, maps of the United States and territories, and shelves of books that made Zara's heart leap with excitement despite her reservations about the fort's regimented atmosphere. The colonel had these shipped from St. Louis at considerable expense, Mrs. Barrett explained, gesturing to the books. Readers, arithmetic primers, history texts, even some literature and science volumes for the older students. It's impressive, Zara admitted, running her fingers along the spines of books that would have been beyond Riversbend's modest budget. The children are fortunate to have such resources, as are they to have a teacher with your experience and dedication. Mrs. Barrett's expression was warm. The colonel and I believe education is essential to civilization's advance, even perhaps especially on the frontier. They spent the morning discussing curriculum and meeting several of the mothers and children who would be part of Zara's class. The children were bright and curious, the parents respectful and eager for their offspring to receive proper education. By midday, Zara found herself genuinely excited about the possibilities her position offered, despite her lingering concerns about the fort's structured environment. She was returning to her quarters to prepare for lunch when she spotted Samuel crossing the parade ground, engaged in conversation with Colonel Barrett. The two men walked with matching strides, the colonel gesturing occasionally as he spoke, Samuel listening attentively with the focused expression she had come to know well during their journey. Curious about their discussion but not wanting to interrupt, Zara continued to her quarters. She had just removed her hat when a knock came at her door. Opening it, she found Samuel standing there, his expression thoughtful. "Good morning," she greeted him. "I saw you with Colonel Barrett. He was showing me the fort's defenses." Samuel removed his hat as he entered at her gesture. "Impressive setup they have here. Did he offer you a position?" Zara asked directly, remembering Mrs. Barrett's comments from the previous evening, not in so many words. Samuel set his hat on a nearby table. "More of a suggestion that my skills would be valuable to the Army should I ever tire of civilian life. And what did you tell him?" "That I appreciate his assessment but have other plans in consideration." His eyes met hers. "How was your morning, Mrs. Barrett mentioned she'd be showing you the classroom." Zara described the facilities and resources with genuine enthusiasm, though she also shared her impressions of the fort's more regimented approach to education. "The colonel expects weekly reports on each student's progress, and there's a prescribed curriculum to follow." "Different from your freedom in Riversbend," Samuel observed. "Very different, though I can't deny the advantages of proper books and supplies." She moved to the window, looking out at the ordered activity of the fort. "The children seem eager to learn and the parents are supportive." "But," Samuel prompted, coming to stand beside her. "But I keep thinking about what you said about building something of my own instead of serving someone else's vision." She turned to face him. "About partnership." His expression softened. "I meant what I said, Zara, but I don't want you making decisions based on feelings that might still be uncertain. You've only just arrived here." "My feelings aren't uncertain," she said quietly. "They've been growing for longer than I realized. The journey simply brought them into focus." Samuel took a step closer, hope evident in his eyes. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that I've spent 2 years teaching children in a converted barn with inadequate supplies, but complete freedom to shape their education as I thought best. And while Fort Laramie offers resources I could only dream of in Riversbend, it would mean trading that freedom for security and structure." She took a deep breath. "I'm not sure that's a trade I want to make." "You have obligations here now," he reminded her gently. "You accepted the position." "For 6 months," she countered, "and I intend to honor that commitment, but after." She hesitated, then continued with growing confidence. "After, I think I'd like to explore other possibilities, perhaps somewhere between Riversbend and Fort Laramie, somewhere a school might be needed." Samuel's eyes never left her face as he processed her words. Jenkins mentioned that Eagle Bluff has no proper school. The children there travel to neighboring settlements or go without education entirely. Eagle Bluff. Zara repeated thoughtfully. 2 days' ride from here, you said. Less with good horses and weather. A smile began to form on his lips. Mrs. Caldwell at the inn mentioned just yesterday that the town council has been discussing the need for a school. They've even identified a building that could be converted, but they lack a teacher. And how far is Eagle Bluff from Jenkins' homestead? Zara asked, her own smile growing to match his. Half a day's ride, maybe less. Samuel closed the remaining distance between them, taking her hands in his. Are you sure about this, Zara? It would mean starting over again, possibly with even fewer resources than you had in Riversbend. But with the freedom to build something meaningful, something that could grow. She squeezed his hands. Something we could build together, perhaps. The hope in Samuel's eyes blazed into certainty. Together, he repeated. I like the sound of that, so do I. Zara's heart felt lighter than it had in months. I'll fulfill my commitment to Fort Laramie. The children deserve no less, but in 6 months, I'll be waiting, Samuel promised. With plans for a school in Eagle Bluff and a home at Jenkins Place, if that's what you want. It is. She had never been more certain of anything. I tried to leave Riversbend because I thought I needed security, structure, the kind of position that would impress my father back in Boston. But what I really need is purpose, freedom, and… She met his gaze directly. And you, Samuel Blackwood. With a gentle reverence that took her breath away, Samuel released her hands to frame her face between his palms. I've loved you since that 4th of July picnic, he confessed softly. When you taught the Peterson boy to look at the stars instead of mocking him for his questions. You showed him a whole universe beyond our little town, and in doing so, showed me what kind of woman you truly are. Samuel, she whispered, overwhelmed by his declaration. I'll wait 6 months, 6 years, whatever you need, he continued. Because a love like this comes once in a lifetime if a person's lucky. I won't need 6 years, Zara assured him, her hands coming to rest on his chest where she could feel his heartbeat strong and steady beneath her palm. 6 months will be quite enough. When he kissed her this time, it held all the promise of their future, a partnership built on mutual respect, shared purpose, and a love that had grown from friendship to something deeper and more enduring. In his arms, Zara found the certainty she had been seeking since leaving Riversbend, the knowledge that her path forward would be challenging but infinitely rewarding. Later that day, as they walked along the river that flowed past the fort, plans began to take shape. Samuel would return to Riversbend long enough to settle his affairs at the Double R, then travel to Jenkins' homestead to formalize the arrangement they had discussed. He would spend the winter and spring establishing himself there, preparing for Zara's arrival when her contract with Fort Laramie concluded. I'll write to you every week, he promised as they watched the sunset paint the western sky in brilliant oranges and purples, and visit when I can. And I'll count the days, she replied, leaning against his shoulder. Though I intend to make the most of my time here, these children deserve my best effort no matter what the future holds. Samuel's arm tightened around her waist. That's one of the many reasons I love you, Zara Bishop. Your commitment to doing what's right, even when it's difficult. The following morning, standing outside the fort's main gate with the rising sun painting the eastern sky gold and pink, Zara watched as Samuel prepared to depart. He had loaded his saddlebags with supplies for the journey back to Riversbend, checked and double-checked his horse's tack, and delayed as long as reasonably possible. You should go, she said softly, though her heart ached at the thought of their separation. You want to reach Jenkins' place before nightfall, I know. He adjusted his hat, his eyes never leaving her face as if committing every detail to memory. 6 months, she echoed, and letters every week, and visits when possible. He reached for her hand, pressing a folded paper into her palm. This is for you, don't read it until I'm gone, Zara nodded, curling her fingers around the note. Be safe, Samuel, always. He leaned down to brush his lips against hers in a brief, tender kiss. Remember what I said that first morning, when you tried to leave at dawn and found me already saddled, ready to ride beside you. You said maybe you couldn't stand the thought of me facing the journey alone, she recalled. I meant it then, and I mean it now. His eyes held hers, earnest and unwavering. You'll never have to face any journey alone again, Zara. Not if you don't want to. With those words, he mounted his horse, touched his hat in a final gesture of farewell, and rode away from Fort Laramie. Zara watched until his figure grew small with distance, then opened the folded paper in her hand. In Samuel's neat, precise handwriting was a simple message. 6 months from today, I'll be waiting at dawn, already saddled, ready to ride beside you toward our future. All my love, Samuel. Pressing the note to her heart, Zara turned back toward the fort, ready to embrace the months ahead with purpose and hope, knowing that when dawn broke on that promised day, she would find Samuel waiting as he had been from the moment she first tried to leave, already saddled, ready to ride beside her toward whatever adventures awaited them. 6 months later, as the first light of dawn brushed the eastern horizon with gold, Zara Bishop slipped from her quarters at Fort Laramie, a leather satchel in one hand and a letter of gratitude to Colonel and Mrs. Barrett in the other. Her time at the fort had been productive, and rewarding her students had thrived under her guidance, and she had gained valuable experience that would serve her well in her next endeavor. The gates of the fort stood open, and beyond them, silhouetted against the brightening sky, a familiar figure waited on horseback, another horse her favorite Palomino saddled and ready beside him. Samuel Blackwood smiled as she approached, his eyes reflecting all the love and promise that had sustained them through months of separation, punctuated by letters and occasional visits. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his boots crunching on the gravel as he came to meet her. "Ready for our next adventure, Miss Bishop?" he asked, taking her satchel and securing it to the Palomino's saddle. "More than ready, Mr. Blackwood," she replied, accepting his help to mount. As they rode away from Fort Laramie toward the future, they would build together a school in Eagle Bluff, a home at what was now Blackwood Ranch, and eventually, a family of their own. Zara marveled at how her attempt to leave Riversbend alone at dawn had led her to this moment. To this man who had been ready to ride beside her when she'd needed him most, even before she'd known she needed anyone at all. And as the sun climbed higher in the Wyoming sky, illuminating the path before them, Zara knew with absolute certainty that wherever life's journey led them, they would face it as they were now side by side, hearts aligned, ready for whatever adventures awaited beyond the horizon.